fast, medium, and slow. Sort of how quickly is this thing jumping in? Is it grabbing the transients really, really quickly? Is it allowing the transient to pass a little bit quicker, or is it allowing the transient to pass a lot before the actual effect begins to take hold? So I'm going to just jump through some audio examples with that. We've got the same thing going on here. I'm just going to jump through fast with the bitter, kind of grabbing them a little too fast, if you ask me. See, now medium has a little bit more of a human flavor, feels a little bit more natural, and then slow is going to actually grab the transients a little bit slower, which brings us to the period. You might want to think of the period sort of as a middle of the sample thing. This will adjust the middle ground between the actual attack and the release. So remember, when any envelope in nature has an ADSR, or an attack, decay, sustain, release. And as we talked about earlier, transient designers tend to avoid the middle and focus mostly on the attack and the release. So this is actually a little bit of a middle ground controller, if you will, to adjust what's happening in the middle of the ADSR. Think of it as a compressor with a little bit of a longer hold setting, a little bit, it grabs it for a little bit longer in order to sort of fine tune how long the middle of the transient, not the attack phase or the release stage, but the middle, the DS, if you will, the decay sustain. This is going to adjust it a little bit, so it will change the curve just a little bit more naturally depending on what you're going for. So we're going to keep this on medium for now. We're going to let the period hold on a little bit longer so there's a little more meat on the sample. And let's just see where we're at with tuning this. Right? And then if we were to go and soften all of the transients, let's try the period at a much higher level. And you'll notice it really blurs it and turns it almost into kind of what a reverb would do, not just softening the transients, but also kind of creating a little bit of a three-dimensional pullback so it's not so in your face or up to the glass. The last thing I really want to cover on this thing overall is this main, center, and stereo. Okay, so this isn't really that complicated. In fact, I almost feel like these are a little bit mislabeled. Main should perhaps just be all, or sort of a bypass in terms of what it's looking for, in terms of how it's reading the frequency spectrum. Center or stereo, we're kind of looking at what would be kind of a mid-side effect. So for instance, when it's in center, the sweet and the bitter are only going to be affecting what the plugin perceives as mono signal. So for instance, let's say a basic drum mix has your kick and snare right up the middle, and then let's say you have hi-hats or crashes or brass or percussion, they're off to the hard left or hard right, something like that. Center is going to make sure that only what the plugin perceives as being up the middle is affected. So in this case, we're going to get a lot of motion and effect and color on just what's up the middle, and in this case, pretty much just kick snare. So right? And then again, stereo really emulates what would happen in terms of a mid-side processing kind of arrangement. Now, this plugin is solely looking at what's outside of the mono signal, what's outside of the middle, ideally the air and percussion, and in this case, the hats and surrounding elements. So now, Flux is only going to be looking at what's happening on the side. Right, so you notice that cranked, we're getting a little bit of drive out of the stereo signal. So you can use a combination of different fluxes too. You can have one just to treat the center drums, and then you can have one kind of stereo the room noise, the air, the ancillary percussion that might be hard panned left or right. Just because you're processing transients doesn't necessarily mean you have to just stick with one instance of a plugin, especially when you have something as powerful as Flux, because Flux will assist you in a number of different ways. You can affect an entire loop and all of its content, middle and sides, center, just what it perceives as mono, or stereo, just what it perceives as being on the sides. So, I think this is a pretty good example of what Bittersweet can do. Let's move on to the electronic drum bus and see what we have there.
Okay, let's continue this in the next video.